Part of the insights that I'm presenting today are actually based on an ARC linkage grant that I'd like to acknowledge. It was completed between 2010 and 2013, where we looked at ubiquitous technology for sustainable food cultures in cities. And this was done with my colleagues, Professor Greg Hearn and Dr. Jaz Choi, as well as with Queensland Health, with the University of Lincoln, with City Food Growers, Food Connect, and the James Street Cooking School. Now, there's a lot of things that are wrong with the food system, but there's also lots of opportunities for making things better with the food system. This one is an infographic. It's not necessarily essential for you to read all the small print, but the three items that Oxfam in this infographic highlights for the improvement of our food system and food culture are around climate change and food prices, around food waste, and around hunger. And we might actually make, hopefully, a small dint of an improvement with some aspects of what's been depicted here in the more global food ecosystem. Now, in addition to that, there is a constant stream of edutainment as well as documentaries being produced that take the food industry apart. It looks at all sorts of different elements of how we currently feed ourselves. And so some of the more notable ones are Food Inc., Fed Up, and a number of others. This is a screenshot I took from a Netflix search. And I think the more people are starting to watch some of these documentaries, the more there is some sort of urgency that the relationship between food producers and food consumers needs to change. And people sometimes think it's, well, such a complicated and complex and wicked problem that it's difficult to know where to start. I think the most common step for lots of the viewers of such documentaries is to turn vegetarian or even vegan, and to have far more consciousness around food purchasing and food consumption decisions. This led to a plethora of nutrition apps being developed. This is one example of a company that we've been working with based in Munich called Freeletics. They actually focus on fitness and exercise tools, but part of that is also the focus on nutrition. Now, other kinds of innovation in the food space pertain to purchasing. This one here is a picture taken in Seoul in South Korea, where the UK-based supermarket giant Tesco was trying to enter a very competitive supermarket market in South Korea. So there were already established brands in South Korea. They came up with the idea of creating supermarkets where you wouldn't expect them, which is in the subway station. So as people were waiting for the train to arrive, they can go past these posters of food and grocery items, and they would scan the barcode. Now, our colleague Jaz Choi is from Korea, and she told me that in some parts of Seoul, for instance, the logistics of that city is so efficient that your groceries would arrive before you do. And then there is very interesting developments at the intersection of food and technology and biology and science, which is depicted or illustrated in this particular slide of New Harvest, building the field of cellular agriculture. If you currently look at the projection of beef production and compare this to the demand side, it may actually cause a lot of trouble and a lot of limitations and constraints, because we would have to populate a lot of land with in order to use it for beef production. Not necessarily to feed everyone in Australia, but in order to feed other countries that are more populous than ours, such as China, such as other parts of the world. And so if we realize that that isn't possible with actual animals, then these startups like New Harvest are proposing to grow protein in the lab. So milk without cows, eggs without hens, and beef without cows is the selling proposition for growing humanity's protein needs and supply in the lab. Now, that in turn triggers further need and further desire, I suppose, for what we call food provenance. People will then want to know, is this piece of steak from a real, live, or previously live animal, or is this something that was grown in a petri dish? And so this gets us to that main point of food provenance, which is one of the main goals for Beef Ledger. This one is a photo I've taken right before I gave a presentation in Munich at the University of Munich. It says, I want to know where my schnitzel comes from. And that's why I'm going to ask in my canteen. Now, the interesting point about this is that this ad that's been distributed across train stations in Munich was actually paid for, it's sponsored by the meat industry. So it's not that in Germany, for instance, the peak body for the meat industry is hiding behind this. They're actually actively, proactively even, out there putting posters at various high traffic spots, encouraging their consumers to ask questions. Where is this coming from? They are not shying away from it, which I think is great. So in this project that we've been working on, and now we have this great extension supported by the Food Agility CRC, we're looking at food provenance, and then Warwick is going to tell you about the supply chain, about smart contracts as well. Specifically, food provenance entails an ability for consumers to find out about the origin of their food, the way that it was produced, as well as who produced it and who was involved in its production. It also entails much more of a focus on seasonality. The fact that strawberries that we might purchase in winter are not necessarily in season. As a result, they might actually be far more subject to fertilizer, to pesticides, to be growing in greenhouses than under normal conditions. We might be interested in the history, not just of the food item, but also the food producers. What kind of track record do they have? Food mileage, what is the impact on climate change, on environmental sustainability? And sometimes food consumers want to know, not just want to know all this data, all this information, they want to visit, especially if it is nearby, but also as part of a new emerging market of food tourism, which extends not just to the kinds of typical areas in Australia, for instance, that we might be familiar with in the Yarra Valley, the Hunter Valley, and the Barossa Valley when it comes to wine products and other kinds of artisan food producers, but it's now something that extends to much larger areas of Australia.